Okay, good morning. Thank you all for joining us for our second installment of CECL Coffee Talk. Thank you very much for doing that again. Just a reminder, this is a new format for you, for us, for me in particular. So hopefully I won't fumble around like I've done on a previous session, but we appreciate your patience as we work towards, bringing you this information on a monthly basis for CECL. As we mentioned previously, and in the webinar presented 2 weeks ago, and a large percentage of you today, this is your first time attending. For some of you who attended a couple weeks ago, we will address some of the same topics, but have additional topics as well. But you will help drive the content for this webinar and future webinars with your questions. So we'll certainly encourage you to submit those a number of different ways, which we will show in a second. My name's Sean O'Brien, I'm the president of Quick Rate, and I'm pleased to be joined again today by Melanie and Steve, and I'm going to let them both introduce themselves. So Steve, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thanks again for joining us. I'm the director of analytics here at Quick Rate and Quick Analytics. I've spent my entire career working with credit unions and community banks, building lots of different financial models, and I've been working with Sean at Quick Rate for over a decade now, trying to bring those types of analytical tools and make them much more accessible for credit unions like you guys. And I am a Wake Forest graduate, so go Deeks.
Thanks, Steve. Melanie?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Melanie. I've been with Quick Analytics for a couple of years. I'm a data analyst, and most recently I started helping out Sean and Steve with form calculation, which has directly to do with your CECL inputs. So if you have any data questions regarding your form, you can definitely direct them to me.
Thank you. Okay, so just a couple of things why we're here today. Again, I think our thought was, CECL is, certainly a cause for concern for all of us. We want to make sure we assist you with an easy transition, and for our subscribers, we felt like this was a way that we could address questions in a group format, also get more maybe feedback from you, be able to share best practices, share improvements that may or come in the tool. So we just thought this forum, doing it on a monthly basis in 2022 would help, just really kind of glide path us into transition. So we'll talk about the CECLSolver, we'll take some questions, and then talk about what's coming next. Just a reminder on how to participate, and I just posted, I think, hopefully into the chat section, and I'll check it in a second, ways you can participate. You're currently all in mute, so you can raise your hand if you want to ask a question out loud, or you can utilize the Q&A box to type a question into us, or the chat feature, and I'll be monitoring those throughout the webinar today and taking those and interjecting those as we continue forward. So first, again, just a reminder, this is an open forum, so we'll take the questions and hopefully, get you on a path for a smooth CECL transition. We do think it's a best practice to run this in parallel for some or all of 2022. And so again, we want to be able to assist and talk about any challenges you might be having as you do that next year. And we think this forum will be helpful. We also want to share common questions we hear from our users and make sure that we're sharing those answers with you. And again, we think this is an effective format to do that. We will look to continue to make enhancements to our tool. We will touch on a few of those today. And so again, we felt like this was another way we could share those with you. And then I think our hope is that as we go through next year, we'll try to invite other experts on here to share what they may be hearing or seeing with their clients as well. So, just a lot of ways to try to make this not only the tool itself, but just provide you with additional resources to feel good about moving forward with CECL. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Steve, and he's going to talk a little bit about the tool and some of the things, just kind of from an overview of how our CECLSolver works. Steve?
Yeah, and this is mostly for our new users here, but for our existing users, you'll see some enhancements that we're rolling out right now that'll make that a little bit give you a little bit more customization if you'd like it. So the first thing you'll notice about the way our tool works is Since we have access to all of those Form 5300 call reports that you guys have to file every single quarter, the second that you log into our tool, it'll be your historical data will be preloaded with everything that we need, meaning we'll have all your balances, your charge-offs, recoveries, past dues by segment, going back in time as far or further than we need to from a CECL perspective. So there's no sort of ramp up or onboarding time, or you don't have to do any account reconciliations and all that kind of work in order to kind of get going with CECL using our tool, at least. The one thing that we do need a little bit of assistance from you guys on the front end is doing those WARM calculations, or the weighted average, the remaining life calculations. And Melanie's going to go through a little detail on how some tips on how to handle WARM calculations. But suffice to say, whether it's something you can get from your core or ALM, a calculation you guys have to do internally yourselves, or something that you want our assistance with and have us do the calculations for you, we can assist you at any level that you need. It's something that we can't get directly off the call reports, so it's not something that we can, it's the one piece of the puzzle that we have to dig into the details because we can't get that automated for us. But once we have a WARM calculation, we plug it into the tool, and all the rest of the number crunching, for the most part, gets taken care of, right? We use those WARMs, we go back into time, we calculate, we look at balances and charge-offs and recoveries, and we calculate your historical lifetime or life of the loan loss rates. That's the historical element of it. And then, of course, the second half of CECL is all about those qualitative factors, which we'll talk a little bit more in a second. Now, they are both internal and external in nature, and obviously they cumulatively represent all the reasons we think things might be a little bit different moving forward than they've been in the past. We provide some really good guidance on the external qualitative factors, the environmental factors, because we can now get segment level lifetime loss rates for your peers. So environmental factors are all about what's going on outside your four walls, right? In the environment around you, that can give us some contextual clues as to what losses have looked like and where they may be headed. Especially relevant for, I think, the smaller the credit union you are, the smaller your portfolio, the more reliant you're going to be on those environmental or external Q factors because of sample size, right? I mean, the smaller the portfolio you have, the less loans on it from a number standpoint are going to have issues. And I'm sure many of you on the call are thinking, if I look at my first mortgage loans over the last 8 years, I probably don't have one loss in the whole portfolio. So how am I supposed to project some sort of loss in the future when I haven't really had any in any reasonable historical time period? It's a great question. And you do that through thickening the sample size and looking at the peer data. What if I looked at all the first mortgage loans for all the similar sized credit unions in my state or in my area? That would give us a much better feel for where losses have been in the past, if not completely negligible. So we use that data and we provide you details on digging through and customizing your qualitative factor adjustments and allow you to do a CECL calculation as of any point in time that you see fit. You can save scenarios using our tool. It's very easy to save everything you're working on as a scenario. You can save as many scenarios as you want. There's no limitations to any of that. Once you have saved scenarios, it's really easy to export it. You click a button, you export the whole thing to a PDF or Excel, or you can kind of pick and choose how much you export depending on your audience, right? If you want to do a quick export, 2 pages, send it to your board, you probably just want the kind of the overview or the summary. If you're sending it to an auditor, they might want obviously all the historical assumptions and details that went into it. So you can kind of customize how you export the tool when you're done. And we allow you a few different areas where you can make notes. Making notes on this, at the segment level as to why did I adjust this balance? Well, because we had a, SBA guarantee here, or we had a bunch of fully share secured loans that we wanted to net out of the calculation. And, in justifying those Q factor adjustments, you're going to want to make notes on what exactly was I thinking when I made this Q factor adjustment on my vehicle loans last month or last quarter. So we make those notes in the Q factors area at that segment so that next quarter, when you're coming in and updating the analysis, you can see exactly what you were thinking when you made the adjustment last time, and if it still holds true or if it needs to be tweaked a little bit. And also externally, right? With your examiners, once they get comfortable with your overall methodology, which they already pretty much have with our warm methodology here, on an ongoing basis, the conversation with your examiners is going to be all about, all right, walk me through what's changed since last quarter, since last month, since last year, mostly in Q factors, right? And so having an organized space where you can discuss all that leads to a lot more efficient conversations with your examiners. So we built that functionality into the tool as well. Sean?
Steve, we had a quick question that came.
Sure.
How soon is the data from the current call report ready in CECLSolver?
As soon as everybody files the call reports. So everyone's got a month to file the call reports. And as soon as that first month is over, the entire universe has the next quarter's data. So let's say we're talking September 30th on November 1st or 2nd. The second that we see all those call reports into the NCUA, we can turn that around and you'll see the all your peer data, all your data automatically updated for September 30th. A correlated question is that you're not limited to running this once that data comes in, meaning you don't have to wait a month in order to run your 930. You can run this our tool at any point in time you want and as frequently as you want to. Yes, the universe of historical data is only going to be updated quarterly, and it'll have that 1 month lag that there's nothing anyone can do about. However, since we're looking at losses, not in any one given small compartmentalized period of time, but over a lifetime, that 1 month of loss of data that doesn't exist in the public realm yet is a much smaller effect on the overall calculation, since we're looking at 5-10 years worth of quarterly data in doing the calculations. But it's a good question. We have a link directly to the NCUA's data now. So when people refile their call reports, we get that refiled information, everything a lot more timely than we used to. We've been working real closely with the NCUA to improve their data quality, honestly, and how quickly they get that data out to third parties and vendors like us. Sean, you're muted.
Yep.
There you
Second
go.
question came in. Will these notes be available by quarter so we can go back to each quarter for our notes in review?
Yes, every time you save a scenario, that'll be as of a point in time. So let's say you have, this is as of 9:30 on this slide. We've saved a scenario, call it scenario A as of 9:30. You made your notes on that on this one run of the tool. You can go back anytime in the future and pull up any historical scenario. It will be accurate and appropriate as of that point in time that you ran it, right? We freeze time when you save a scenario so that they're always historically accurate, so you can go back and look at them. So you can go back and look at any one you want to, and the notes from the segments will be tied to that scenario when you ran it as of that historical point in time. So if you want to update a scenario with new data and just tweak your notes and then resave it as your new scenario to save time, that's not a problem. That's easy to do using our tool.
Great. Thanks, Steve.
Sure.
Okay. So one of the things that, we know has been a concern for a lot of our users is just, kind of as we work through this transition year, what kind of timelines, are we looking at? How often should we be recalculating warms, or how often should we be running the analysis? And so we're just going to touch on a few of those. Steve, if you want to take.
Yeah. I hate answering questions with questions, but I'm going to do it anyway. When people ask, we like your tool, we want to start using it. When do we need to start a subscription by? When do we need to actually have one of these things run? And I have to answer that with another question is, well, when's your next exam, right? We know when the absolute deadline is. Everyone has to be living in a CECL world and using CECL as the official way you calculate your reserve at the beginning of 2023. So, right, the last call report that anyone will ever file where their reserve is not a CECL reserve is 12/31/22. But we know you can't get to that date without tackling CECL, right? Your examiners, nobody will let you get that far. So it's really a question of when is your next exam, because that last exam, there's the lucky few out there that had an exam in the last couple months, and they're on an 18-month cycle, so they won't have another exam until 2023 when we're all already living in CECL. But for all of us that have an exam anytime during the year, next year, expect that your examiners are going to have a lot more questions about CECL and your preparedness than they have in the past. we get kind of real-time feedback on this exam cycle, and we've watched it evolve over the last year. As 9-10 months ago, it was a checkbox, right? Your examiner is saying, are you investigating CECL? If you could say yes, they check their box, they move on, and we're done with it. Now we're getting, all right, you're investigating it. Great. What have you come up with? What methodology you think you're going to use? Do you have any idea where you're going to be shortfall or surplus wise? Now we're starting to see questions like, show me what you've done, walk me through it. And they've got the same learning curve as us. Don't assume that your examiners are all CECL experts already, right? They're learning about it just like everybody else is. And so expect that the more they learn about it, the more questions they're going to have, right? The more detailed their expectations on what you have accomplished are going to become. So if you have an exam during the year next year, I would highly suggest as a best practice that a couple months at least before that next exam, you have some sort of solution, meaning you have a methodology picked out, you're doing it internally, or you have someone like us helping you with it. You have an idea of what your surplus or shortfall might look like. You can explain your model or your tool to them, meaning like, what assumptions are going to move the needle here, or what inputs are totally irrelevant and don't make any difference no matter what we plug in. Those are the kind of things they're looking at to see whether you kind of understand what you're doing. And if you can show them that, and then their last question is, all right, well, have you been running it over time? Is your surplus getting larger, or is it getting smaller as we work through the next year economically and credit quality, credit environment wise and everything else? So that's kind of what I suggest. Is anyone adopting early? Good question. Even if we did write it there ourselves. We don't see very much of it. Honestly, I think it's very specific situations that would cause someone to consider formally adopting CECL before we all have to. Most people would never consider it because they're saying, well, there's still a chance that it's not going to happen at all. We don't really see that happening. At this point, we feel like the NCUA is pretty much kind of officially capitulated that this is all happening, and it's all happening as of, and it's not going to get kicked down the can down the road any further. But there are some specific situations. If we had a credit union we were talking with just a couple of weeks ago who said, we're having issues with our examiners right now. We're having an exam. They're not comfortable with our with our current methodology. They're kind of making us redo a bunch of stuff, and they don't like where we're landing. Can we just use CECL as a reason to kind of restart that whole conversation and reframe it around, well, we're not going to argue with you about the old methodology anymore. We're going to start a new methodology. We're going to adopt CECL early, and we think it'll be a fresher, better conversation to have with our examiners. That's certainly an option, and we see a few credit unions doing that, but I'd say 99% of the industry, so that the vast majority of all credit unions are going to just adopt it when we have to, right at the end of next year. How often do we run the tool? And how often do we calculate our WARM, which is the big input kind of for the tool that might require some work on our end, some legwork? Two separate questions. Right now, CECL is not the law of the land. So we don't need to be running CECL every single month and, trying to, every single time we run our reserve, we don't necessarily we don't have to run it with CECL or a CECL version of it as well. It's just the whole purpose of it right now is to demonstrate to our regulators, our examiners, that we are prepared for when it is coming. So I suggest running it on a quarterly basis, right? That's when it's going to be moving the needle. That's when things are going to be changing the most, because that's when we get that gigantic universe of new credit data for the entire industry, for your credit union and for everybody else too. On a monthly basis, you're just not going to see a whole lot of change. And that's a good thing. And that's one of the purposes of CECL, right? Since CECL is all about losses over the remaining life of the asset. They want you to take a much longer term approach to reserve accounting. And so we're considering losses over, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 year period. So in any given month, there's going to be less incremental changes in our reserves, or there certainly should be under a CECL methodology, because we're taking a longer term view. So I said quarterly, no more than quarterly right now, unless it's just something that you want to do. It's not that hard to update it using our tool. So you certainly could do it monthly without too much effort. But the WARM calculations, they just need to be relatively current. Okay, there's nothing in the CECL standard at all that discusses how frequently remaining life calculations need to be done. It's not there that we've seen. It just simply needs to be current. And again, on a monthly basis, or even sometimes on a quarterly basis, using all that loan level data to recalculate your WARM is just not going to move the needle. If the average remaining life of your new vehicle loans is 3.12 years, and then you run it next month and redo the whole WARM calculation and it's 3.14 years, that's a rounding error. It's not going to make any difference in the overall CECL calculation. So if you're spending a lot of time and energy digging into the details, the loan level details for that WARM calculation every month, I'd say at least now back off. I don't think that's time well spent at all. I would start by doing it quarterly. And honestly, right now, before we're compliant with CECL, if it's not changing much, just wait 6 months before you do it again. Your examiner will certainly tell you if they don't think you're doing it often enough, and then you can, all right, well, so we'll update it more frequently. But don't do the work unless it's going to help, unless it's going to change things, unless you're being demanded by your examiner to do so. And then the other one, Sean, I think we'll tackle in a couple minutes.
Sounds good. All right. Moving forward. So again, probably as Steve mentioned earlier, the one piece of data we cannot get from the call report is obviously what are your WARMs. There are a number of different ways that you can tackle this, right? Again, for some of you, you might be able to, or you might already be receiving or generating a report from your core system that provides you with that data. However, we found that a number of credit unions don't have that information. And so what we've done is given you both a tool to calculate the WARMs if you can get some information out of your core system, or we also give you the option of utilizing us to assist in that calculation. Melanie is the individual on our team who heads that up for us. And so she's going to talk to you today about what information she needs. And I can't stress enough how important it is to try to really work to get clean data to Melanie, because that will really make the process of calculating these WARMs much, much easier for everybody involved. So Melanie, if you want to talk a little bit about what a good data file looks like.
Yes, thank you, Sean. So as you mentioned, we're just going to briefly go over exactly what a clean and complete data file looks like. And this is to calculate your WARM. Right off the bat, there's a few things about the file itself. We do ask that when you submit your loan files, please have them in Excel or CSV format. If they are not in either of those formats, please go ahead and convert it for us. I have noticed a lot of times people are converting their loan data files. Some data will get cut off, particularly the column headers. So before you send it, just make sure that the data is complete and everything is titled properly. Please provide the as of date. What this means is the date the report was ran or the date of the financials along with the report. And then last, your file should only include active loans. This includes participation loans. However, any loans that have been charged off or paid off, we ask you to go ahead and exclude those from the data file. So let's just right off the bat for just the data file. Next, we're going to go into the specific fields that we need within each loan record within your core system file. There's 4 fields that we need. This is true for all loan categories except for unsecured credit card loans. Those are processed a little bit differently, and we will go over that momentarily. The 4 fields we need are, number 1, we need a unique phone number. This is just an internal reference for me and you to be able to quickly pull up a loan in case you're wondering what's going on with it, where's that in the report. That being said, please avoid using any private customer information. Number 2, we would need the current loan balance. Next, we would need the loan's maturity date. If you are unable to provide us with the maturity date, we can estimate it. We would just need, the basic information from it, such as when the loan was opened and the terms and payment frequency, etc. That's for the maturity date. And last, we need the call report account code. What this means is I need to be able to map each individual loan into their appropriate call report category, which are listed over here on the right. So we need to be able to identify where each loan goes. This can either be a separate column that tells what type of loan it is, or I notice a lot of people will send in, some kind of code and then a key to go along with the code. So in the next slide, we have some examples of what a clean data file looks like. Right here we have, the loan number, the code, and on another tab they gave us this particular person provided us the key that has a description of each loan and where they fall in their call report category. And along with the maturity date, loan balance, and then the as of date listed somewhere. So right here we have the as of date as September 30th, 2021, along with the 4 fields. These are simplified loan files. If yours are a little bit have more data, that's okay. You don't have to work on simplifying them as long as we have those 4 fields that are shown on the screen. Next, we're going to go over credit card loans because they are processed differently because they do not have a maturity date. For those, we do need the loan balance. But instead of a maturity date, we ask you that you provide us with a monthly principal payment. If you cannot give us a principal payment, we will calculate it using the interest rate either that you can provide us, or we'll find one listed on your call report. But these credit card loans are done on an aggregate level. So on your warm file, you will just see one line item for all credit card loans, and then we will process the entire current loan balance along with the principal payment to figure out the weighted average remaining maturity rate. So that's it for credit card loans. I did want to mention, if you have any questions regarding what your file looks like, please direct it to me. I do always keep your call reports pulled up when I complete your warm, just to make sure that all your balances do match up with the file that you provide us. If I see any big discrepancies, I will make sure to reach out to you. Thank you. Back to you, Sean.
Okay, great. Thank you. And just a reminder, there is information on the resources tab for you to see, just about information and any other questions, again, regarding that warm calculation. So the second biggest area, I think, I don't want to call it confusion, but I think just probably general, where we get the most interest from questions is really around the Q factors, right? That it's something that a lot of credit unions have been currently doing, but maybe for some of the smaller ones, it's not something you've had to do much with in the past. So we're going to talk just a little bit about, how to kind of just as best we can streamline that process. Steve?
Yeah, so this is an area where we've made some enhancements to the tool that our current users will notice popping up in the next few days here on our tool. But and that's it's a time where I'd like to point out that CECL has been a bit of a living, breathing thing, right? The regulations, the expectations around it, the methodologies that are appropriate, the timeline, all of that has been a bit of a moving target. And so we need to make sure that whatever tool you're using, you need to make sure if you're using a tool, and we as developers of these need to be flexible with that. And so when we get more feedback from examiners, from auditors, from users about certain areas where they'd like a little bit more detail or customization or flexibility, then we take that into account. But we always want to make sure that we're trying very hard to present a straightforward, rational solution to CECL, and we're never going to start overcomplicating things or over engineering. But qualitative factors is an area where in the current version of a tool, we just ask you for a net qualitative factor adjustment. Again, that's just the net of all of those internal and external reasons why we think things might be different going forward. And that's the adjustment that we make to our historical experience. But we're offering kind of a new area of a tool now, a new tab that allows us to dig into the details, and you can plug in separate adjustments for based upon peer experience and based upon economic data, both of which we give you a huge amount of information for, right? We don't have access, from an internal qualitative factor standpoint, this is the one area where CECL is really not that different from what we've always been doing. Under the incurred loss methodology, we were always looking at internal non-public data like our risk ratings and looking at how they're changing and migrating over time to give us a feel for where we think losses might be headed directionally versus where they've been in the recent past. That analysis you guys have always been doing, and you need to continue doing it pretty much unabated under CECL. Where we can be of the most value add from the qualitative factor standpoint is in that external, that environmental data. And I think it's more critical, again, as I mentioned before, the smaller the credit union you are, the more we're going to have to rely on what's going on outside of our four walls and the environment around us, because We may have whole segments where we just don't have any loss experience over a reasonable period. So now using our tool, we can plug in a peer-based adjustment after looking closely at what type of losses our peers have had over a recent time period. If we have pretty much a flat line of losses, we can still get a feel for where losses have been going in our market at the segment level by looking at the peer data. And then finally, we also give you access to some economic trends that you can overlay on top of your loss experience or your peers' loss experience. And if you want to make a separate economic base adjustment at the segment level, you can do that as well. Now, from an internal standpoint, we allow you to add as many columns, as many factors as you want. So if you're making an adjustment based upon risk rating, you would just plug in, this is a risk rating adjustment. That's how you would label the adjustment, and you can adjust any segments of the portfolio based on that. If you want to add additional Q factors, you just click on the little plus and you can add a bunch of additional Q factors and then make notes on it, right? The whole process with your examiners on an ongoing basis is going to be about, now that we're comfortable with your overall methodology for CECL, just walk us through what's changed since last time we were here. How are you adjusting Q factors differently than last time? So the ability to kind of make notes on exactly what your thought process was this month or this quarter and your justification or defense of those adjustments at the segment level is what's going to make those conversations be a lot more efficient. So it's just kind of an administrative tool that we add there, allowing you to make those Q factor notes at the segment level, and then they get attached to that risk pool throughout the analysis whenever we save it or export it or create a scenario. John? Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
so just the next issue we want to kind of talk about that, again, as Steve said, CECL has been kind of this, living and breathing thing. And the initial standard and the guidance, was really this notion that the concept of impaired loans was going to go away. And again, kind of what we're seeing in practice is that it's not completely uniform in the interpretation of those individually assessed or impaired loans. And so candidly, we are seeing it being handled in both ways. So we decided that we needed to at least incorporate, we initially had incorporated a way to deal with these, but we've refined it a bit to allow you to more specifically account for and identify those individually assessed loans. So Steve's going to walk you through what we've done to the tool to improve this area. But Steve?
Yeah. You know, switch to the next slide. Okay, so this is where we're adding in added in a new tab into the tool just to allow you to manage the individually assessed loans. So again, what that standard is, what that threshold is going to be for when you have to cull the loan from the herd, from the collective pool, and deal with it with an expected loss on an individual basis is still a moving target. We're awaiting more, better, and more detailed feedback from the NCUA and the auditors about that. We know it's not the old standard of impairment. FAS 5 and FAS 114 cease to exist and are replaced with CECL, but it doesn't mean the concept is dead. It's more undead, so to speak. And so if you have individual loans that are close to default, or you have a very specific loss or reserve you need to attach to it, now you can just put that loan data directly into the tool. The only thing that we were ask you to do is let us know what area of the call report is coming from, meaning which call report segment that individual loan is coming from, so we can properly subtract it from the summary analysis, so we're not double counting it, right? We don't want to establish a reserve, an individual assessed loan reserve for it, and then go and then keep it as part of the bucket, and then establish more reserve from it as part of the bucket. So if you'll let us know that, and then you just plug in balance and current balance and what you expect to collect from it, then we'll properly subtract it from the collectively assessed pool portfolio on the summary, and have a separate little section at the bottom there which just says, hey, this is a separate amount that we've established for these individually assessed loans. And how much or little with any of these, as I kind of was alluding to earlier, with all these enhancements, if you're a current user and you want to keep using the tool the way you've been using it, if you like just plugging in a single Q factor net adjustment without all the components, you can do that. You don't have to go and put in the additional detail. Just like with the individually assessed loans, if you're happy keeping them in the buckets, keeping them in the pools and not pulling any off for an individual assessment, or your examiner is not pushing you on that, You don't have to do that. You can leave this page completely blank and everything will work exactly as it has before with your old saved scenarios and with new scenarios moving forward. So it's all optional, enhanced flexibility in case your examiners are requesting or requiring it. Sean?
All right. Okay. Thank you, Steve. So just again, a reminder, if you, everybody is currently on mute. If you do want to submit a question, you can certainly use the Q&A box. You can use the chat feature, and you can also just raise your hand and we can unmute you. So we did have a question come in here. Bear with me. It's a little bit long, so I'm going to have to read it here. I'm just going to read it aloud. Has there been any comment from NCUA, others regarding scale necessary for a credit union's portfolio to represent a statistically significant scale? Small credit unions have no losses in a couple of categories, need to look to market for what's quote unquote actually likely for losses. But at some scale, a credit union's actual experience is a better indicator of future experience than the experience of a market as a whole. Any comment regarding what portfolio size would allow me to say, I believe any predictive value derived from our own portfolio experience to be more accurate than what would be derived by looking to the market as a whole? Thank you. So a good question. I mean, I think ultimately, and Steve, I'll let you go after me. My reaction to that is we think that's why the WARM provides you with a great way of doing that, that we think you should emphasize your your portfolio performance. We think it's the logical place to start, which is to say, if I'm thinking about future losses, let's look at a lot of different scenarios of mine in the past and see where we have been, and then fine tune it with that peer data and that qualitative, assessment looking forward. So no, I think everybody should start this way, and again, have an idea of where your range of losses have been, and fine tune that from there. Steve, anything you want me to read any?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. And I hate to say it's also subjective, but it is, right? Anyone on the call here, maybe I can help some people out. Anyone on the call here who thinks that CECL is somehow less subjective than our current reserve methodologies, it's not. If anything, there's probably more subjectivity under CECL than under the incurred loss methodology. So it's all going to be about making reasonable assumptions and finding some way to defend or justify them. As far as, at what size can you say, hey, I've got enough loans in my portfolio, I'm big enough that I really should be just focusing on my historical experience? It's probably less about the size of your portfolio and more about the loss experience, right? If you got a $3 billion portfolio of mortgages, but you haven't had any losses on them in 8 years, that's really not any better or different than a $30 million one that doesn't have any losses over 8 years. What you're left with is no historical experience that can give me a justification for a positive Q factor adjustment that I know I'm going to need, right? No, we can't go in there and say, hey, we've had no losses on our $1 billion worth of mortgage loans over the last 7 years. We don't expect we'll have any in the next 7 years. So our reserve is going to be zero there, and we'll see you next year. We know that's not going to cut the mustard. And so we need to look outside our four walls, right? We wanted to give you market data that was, as I keep saying the word apples to apples, but I think it's really important, comparable apples to apples segment level data. So instead of picking some generic economic trend that may or may not have had some correlation during the last recession and may or may not still have a correlation during this next one, we're looking at, state level, similar size credit union loss rates at a particular segment of the portfolio. So that's about as tight as you're going to get for market data that will give you some sort of a non-zero value for losses historically, even if yours is zero. And we think that that's probably going to be the most justifiable way forward. You certainly take into account economic trends as much as you think they have predictive value. And certainly take it into account if your examiner requires that you do so, even if you don't think it has predictive value, because we know from a practical consideration, if they say, hey, have you taken into account these economic trends? you saying, no, I didn't really like to. It's not always, if they want to see it in there, you're going to have to do some correlation or at least prove that there is no correlation, which a lot of times actually isn't that hard to do. But it's a good question without a very specific answer. It's going to be some back and forth between you and your examiner. So, people being scared to talk to their examiners or bring up CECL until their examiner asks them to, I think are missing an opportunity. As long as you understand CECL well enough to have a tool like ours help you with it, then I think it's an opportunity to talk to your examiners and get some feedback from them. So you're not doing a bunch of needless work because you were, too scared to bring it up and hoped they wouldn't either.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Steve. And again, I think we want to emphasize again, that was a big part of our, thinking about our tool, right? Is we do think it's familiar to what you've been doing today in the ALLL, but more importantly, again, really starts with your data as a way in which we help aggregate for you to make the analysis better. But you can really see what the range of losses have been at your institution and then make qualitative adjustments around that. But we always think that that's the best place to start is with what's happened at your unique institution. The second question we have is, can we have a ratio added to the summary page on the percentage above or below the required reserve amount? Example, 10% over reserve. This may be one way I need to talk to you a little bit more directly. I'm not completely sure what you're asking, and I'll have Steve comment, but I think what we've tried to do is provide you with what peers, have done to give you some context to your overall numbers. But Steve, do you want to take a shot?
Yeah, Mike, my guess was a little more simple than that. I think what the question was is we show what your CECL reserve would need, your reserve under CECL, and then your current reserve, and then we show you what the surplus or shortfall is. If you're just asking for that in a ratio format, so we can say, hey, I have $1 million in reserve. CECL says I need 1.2 million. I have a 20% deficit. If it's something like that, then we can certainly consider adding that as a little parentheses and then have the percentage there just to help you out with that math. But just in general, as you can tell, we like to think that the tool has a very clean and easy to use kind of layout. And so we think very hard before we add any more bulk or additional numbers or kind of other stuff to the tool so that it can still be very clean and easy to follow. But if a lot of people feel like that's a helpful ratio to be able to see right front and center, we'll certainly consider adding it.
Yeah, and that's exactly what he was looking for, Steve. So
okay, good.
The next question we have is, are you suggesting that rather than setting up special segment pools, use the accommodating individual loan assessment section to calculate loans with potential losses? Steve, I'll take this and I'll let you comment as well. I think what we're doing is trying to give you both, right? So when we initially designed the tool, we felt like the special segment pools was what the, kind of followed the thought of what CECL was doing by eliminating FAS 5 and FAS 114 and those impaired loans. Again, what we are seeing in practice is a little bit of both. And so we don't frankly have a preference. We simply wanted to provide our users with the ability to do it either way. Steve, any comments you want to add?
Yeah, it's a good question that we're still going to find out some more information about as we go here and get more detailed feedback from examiners on the ground during the year next year. But I think I typically suggest I would lean towards keeping them pooled whenever possible. Because I think it meets the spirit of what CECL is supposed to be doing here. And when we look at historical data, guess what? All those loans that have had hair on them in the past are in our historical data. So when we do the pool calculations, the collectively assessed pools, when we look at their historical experience, that includes the good, the bad, and the ugly. It includes all the loans in that segment. And the peer data also is going to include the good and the bad. Probably a lot of the losses that we have had in the past came from loans that either were impaired by the old standard or had some issues. So really, technically speaking, losses on loans that have some issues are built into the collective, the collectively assessed part of the tool. However, it's certainly more conservative to say, hey, there are a handful of ones that are really problematic where loss and default is imminent, foreclosure, what have you, repossession of a vehicle. that we feel like we need to have a specific loss on top of the fact that it's already sort of taken into account in the overall bucket. And that's how I would approach it. I would be judicious about it. But there's probably some obvious candidates you guys probably have in the back of your mind, which ones you're thinking about maybe adding there, and take a look at it. And then we do that, and our examiners will look at it and they'll say, depending on what side of the bed they got up on, yeah, that's good. No, you don't need to do it for any of them, or I need you to see you doing it on some more of them. And then we'll have to make adjustments and be flexible. But our tool is flexible enough to handle it. However, things end up shaking out.
Great, thanks, Stephen. I had another question come in. Will the printed report show the date you're running it for?
Yes, it will. The older version just had, you could see that all the financial data was as of that last quarter end from the peer data and everything, but that was something that we wanted to be more front and center. So now on the newer version of the tool, the column that has your current loan balances, the as of date of the CECL calculation, right on top of that column, it'll say date as of, and it'll have that date. And you'll be able to modify that date. If you come in and you get a whole scenario as of September 30th and you want to update it for October 30th, you would just plug in your GL balances as of October 30th. Then you'd check to make sure if anything happened in the last month that would cause you to need to tweak your Q factors. And then you'd put right on top, hey, I updated these balances as of October 30th, and it'll ask you right there. And then when we export the tool, you'll clearly see that it's as of that specific date. That's a good question.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we've already kind of opened the Q&A session. I should have moved the slide. Again, you're seeing live TV in action, so not
That's right.
we don't always have the power of editing, so I am certainly fallible as a host. But I certainly appreciate all the questions we've been getting. We certainly have time for some more if there's any more. But if not, as we're waiting for any more additional questions, we will continue this series, as I mentioned, into the new year. We will run one just once a month going forward. So certainly please submit any questions or topics you would like us to cover in greater detail. We will continue to field questions and then try to take a sampling of those and present those each month. As Steve said, right, we will continue to talk to regulators, auditors, again, trying to get more information just on best practices. So we may revisit some of these topics throughout the year as we get additional information. But I think the overriding point here is that we want to be an ongoing resource for all of you as you work through CECL, so that again, when implementation time does come in 2023, this is just a non-event for you. So if there aren't any additional questions, on behalf of Melanie, we do have another one come in here. What has everyone seen as far as funding requirements with CECL? More funding needed or overfunded? Steve, I'll take a shot and open it to you. Again, obviously, kind of unique to your institution. So I would say generally what we're seeing now for most is pretty much the same of what you've had. Again, I think this is where CECL has been a living thing. Initially, the idea that CECL would require more in the reserve really came from the fact that we were going to be looking at losses over a longer period of time and the unfunded commitments. But because of the benign credit history most institutions have been experiencing, and this is part of, again, the reason why we think getting out and doing this and talking to your regulators really changes. Most we haven't seen that much unless the loss experience suggests something otherwise. But we really have seen it's kind of just a continuation of what you've been doing. And so it's why I've often said CECL is really playing the same game with a new set of rules, right? We haven't seen a dramatic difference so far. Steve, anything you want to add?
I would agree with that sentiment at the aggregate level. If I were to average up all the credit unions that we've worked with and compare their CECL reserves to their, or at least as of this point in time, what CECL is suggesting versus their current reserves, it's probably about even. But there is a large dispersion within that, right? I see a lot that are significantly overfunded and a lot that are significantly underfunded, but they kind of tend to even out on the aggregate. So there are lots of credit unions out there that have a very sizable reserve and yet never really deal with very many charge-offs. It's credit unions, I think, are a bit even more all over the map on an individual basis than commercial banks are because of the purpose of a lot of credit unions, right? They have a very specific customer base, and with certain credit unions, their customer base are very conservative, and they never really miss payments, and there's almost no charge-offs. Yet we see reserves close to 1% for some credit unions that have maybe 1 basis point in charge-offs a year, which means that they've got 100 years worth of net charge-offs sitting in their reserve right now. They're certainly overfunded from CECL perspective. Yet on the other side of the coin, we see some credit unions that, because of the customer base that they serve, they're naturally going to see higher losses on some things like vehicle loans. And yet the NCUA has always been comfortable with a 30 or 40 basis point loan loss reserve that's really appropriate to handle 1 year worth of net charge-offs, whereas CECL kind of pushes us towards front loading the reserve for losses over the whole life of a portfolio and not in any one given year. So those credit unions are going to be a little bit underfunded, but it's about balancing your historical experience with what's going on in the environment around you to see what's going on, what you expect moving forward. You may have had some very high recent losses because of a relationship that you just finally had to cut bait on, but outside of that one relationship, things have been very clean, and your peers also have very low losses in that segment. Those are some very good justifiable reasons for negative Q factor adjustments. I think this is a good time to just clear the air. You're allowed to have negative Q factor adjustments, all right? Despite what you might have heard. I mean, as Sean was saying, because of the relatively benign credit environment that we've been in as a whole, as a country for a while, everyone gets the feel that, Q factors are a way of taking your historical experience and making it worse for your expectations for the future, right? But there is no directional demand for qualitative factors. If you've had a recent sizable loss, but for 5 years before that, you were clean as a whistle, right? That's in your historical record now. You're going to have to deal with that loss. It might suggest you have a very high historical lifetime loss rate, but you've been clear before it. You expect to be clear moving forward. Maybe your peers have a low loss. These are good reasons to justifiably have a negative qualitative factor adjustment, just knowing that it's going to be more heavily scrutinized, right? You know that when you put that out there, they're really going to want to see some good justification for it. And that's fair enough. But I thought it should be pointed out.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Okay, so I think unless there's any other questions on behalf of Steve and Melanie and all the team here at Quick Rate, we want to thank you for joining us for today. I hope you appreciate the new format. Again, I will work to improve my performance each month on this, but again, we hope you'll find it helpful. We certainly encourage you in the interim prior to our next webinar in January to email us with any questions or topics you would like us to cover. You can certainly request a demo with David, Suri, or Jason, and see your data in the tool if you're not already a subscriber. And again, anything in between, let us know. But otherwise, enjoy the rest of your Friday, and we appreciate your time this morning. Thanks so much, and have a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody.